If you've ever wanted to take one of your hides and tan it into a soft, supple, luxurious fur-on tan, stay tuned because I'm going to show you the easiest method you will ever find. Good afternoon. In today's video, we're going to take a raw beaver hide and turn it from just off the beaver into a soft, supple, completely tanned fur. And the tanning process that we're going to be using is non-toxic, chemical-free, easy, and uses only eggs from the grocery store. The first step in any tanning process is to flesh the hide that you're going to be working on. So what we need to do is remove all the membranes and all the fat straight down to the hide. We're going to be using a fleshing knife today. These hides are in the freezer for a while, so they're fresh hides, but they're not brand new off the critter hides. These are winter hides that were prime. As you can see the change in color, all this white hide right here, that's what we want to get down to, and we want to remove all this meat and flesh and membrane from the hide. Okay, it looks like we're going to get a rainstorm here, so I'm going to have to move this into the garage, but I got my first hide fleshed out. As you can see, I could do a little bit more touch up on it, but for the most part, it's pretty well clean. In this process, the more fat you can remove now, the easier your life will be later. Fat can interfere with the oils that are part of the process that will be needed to soak into the hide to tan the hide. So fat is not our friend in this scenario. A certain amount of it will melt off when the hide is drying, but the more you can get off now, especially by the head and the neck, if you plan to keep those areas, the better your life will be. So I'm just going to give it another quick once over, and then we're going to get out of here before hopefully get the rain. All right, now that our hide is all fleshed, the second step in the process is to go ahead and dry the hide. What we're going to do is we're going to take small finishing nails, and we're just going to tack them around the hide to get whatever shape that we want. I'm using a board today that has kind of the oval pattern that I want for my hide, and I'm just going to kind of follow the colors and go from there. Some people will use a staple gun in this process. I prefer just to use regular old finishing nails. Don't put them in all the way, just a little bit, because they're going to come out later. Now I picked about the worst possible day to do this. It's about 90 degrees today with a thunderstorm brewing. You can probably hear that in the background. So because it's so warm and muggy, I'm going to want to really be careful with this hide so that it doesn't start to spoil. One of the things I'm going to do is maybe kind of put a small fan in the area. I don't want it to dry too fast, but moisture can breed bacterial growth, so when it's dry, it will be in a preserved state. I want to get to that, I don't want to take days to get to that spot. I want to get there kind of as soon as I can without compromising the hide at all. I got in right before the rain started. It's been raining pretty good. So I've got my hide all tacked out. It's not perfect. If it was going to go to market, it would be a little bit better shaped, but this is going to get tanned, so I don't really care. What I'm doing now is I'm just going through, and any big chunks, I'm just kind of cleaning up the entire hide. Sit on this hide. Now I'm going to let it sit on this board until it's dry. And when I'm talking dry, I'm talking like it's going to feel like rawhide, kind of like a drum. And it will be hard and crispy and dry to the touch. Some of this residual fat will start to melt off. So what I like to do is every day or so I'll come through with a paper towel and just wipe it down. And what that will do is all of this fat that is kind of broken down and solidified, it will take it off the hide. So we're just going to leave it. So we're going to leave it like this for a few days, a week or so, until it's dry. Depending on your climate, it could dry in a couple days. I've had this hide on the board for 2 days, and I actually ended up putting a fan on it just because the humidity was so high, just so that flies wouldn't get to it and bacteria wouldn't grow. Now there's a couple spots in here where there's some wounds, and I'm not sure if these are, I don't think these are knife marks. These right here are probably knife marks, but these right here, I believe, are probably battle scars from the beavers fighting for territory or breeding. And sometimes you have to be pretty careful around those, and they're drying at a different rate than everything else. So you can see by, you can maybe hear, it's tight like a drum. It's dry and tight like a drum. My big spots of concern are up here where there's a little bit more meat in the nose area. So if you do leave the face on it, you're gonna have to really watch this area. But this is dry enough for my purposes. Basically what I'm concerned with is I want this to dry so that it holds its shape and it is impervious to bacterial growth. So right now we should be pretty good. I'm gonna just take it off the board, roll it up, and I can put it away for months if I want. It will preserve like this for quite a long time. I've tanned beaver hides as long as 6 months, 8 months after putting them on the board, and they've tanned just fine. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this off and get ready for the final and last process. So now that we've got our hide off of the board, you'll notice that it's pretty stiff yet. It's kind of the consistency of a soft cardboard or rawhide. Now you'll notice that the hide is a little bit shiny, and that's because there's some oil on the hide from the fat that has melted on the hide, from the fat that's still attached to the hide. So there's two things to consider here. Number one, because there's a little bit of fat on the hide, that can block tanning liquid. And also, there tends to be just a very slight membrane that's attached to the inside skin side of the hide. So what I find helps the tanning liquid to absorb better is to either thin the hide or to at least rough it up to penetrate, so that that tanning liquid can penetrate that membrane and that oil. So there's two ways to do this. In the past, I've just taken like a hand sander and I've just, or like a block with sandpaper, and I've just gone over the hide a little bit, and that tends to be adequate. But if you're working a really thick hide, like a beaver hide, it also helps to thin the hide a little bit, because that will give you a softer product in the end. If you're tanning a thin-skinned animal like a squirrel, a rabbit, a fox, you probably wouldn't need to do that, because the hide is already so thin, it's going to be soft and the liquid's going to penetrate much better. But on a beaver especially, around the face and the neck, down along the center of the spine and down by the tail, tends to be a very thick area on the beaver. And I suppose that's because when the beaver's fighting for territory or mates, that's where they would get injured from other beavers biting them. So they probably need a thicker hide for protection. So there's two ways that I deal with this membrane in the oil. Is I can either take like a piece of sandpaper on a block and just go over the entire hide and rough it up, or I actually have a hide scraper tool. I had this from when I was brain tanning bison hides. If you do have some sort of hide scraping tool, it helps just to go through and kind of break that membrane up a little bit, and then at the same time, you're kind of thinning that hide just a little bit. You're not getting too crazy. So that's what we're going to do with this hide, and then we're going to come back and I'll talk about the tanning liquid. Both work equally, both are equally productive. It just depends what tools that you have on hand. I like to use the hide scraper just because I can get into specific areas. When it comes for amounts, this is actually a dozen egg yolks. Typically I could get by with maybe 2 to 3 egg yolks for one beaver hide, but I do plan on doing a couple of other hides today as well. So the important thing to remember is when you're applying the egg yolks, the emulsified oil, so there's a thing that can prevent the absorption of the tanning liquid into the hide. The emulsified oil won't really penetrate down into the fibers the way that we want it to by itself. So we need an agent to carry that yolk into the hide fibers. And what we use is about 2/3 egg yolks to 1/3 water, plain tap water. And I mix them up like scrambled eggs, and here's my mixture. It's just 1/3 water, 2/3 egg yolks. And what that does is the water acts as a binder to that emulsified oil, and it will draw that oil down into the fibers of the hide. So when you think about a hide, think of the fibers of the tissue kind of being intermeshed with each other. And when we apply the emulsified oils, they will soak into those fibers. The problem is, if we just let the liquid dry, the fibers will continue to be glued into place and they will not be soft. So what we need to accomplish is, when these fibers absorb that emulsified oil tanning liquid, as the hide is drying, we want to manipulate, stretch, and move that hide. So those fibers are actually moving against each other, and as they dry, they become coated individually with that tanning liquid. And that way, once all of the moisture has evaporated out and the hide is dry, these individual fibers have now been oiled, so to speak, or lubricated, and that allows them to move and be soft. If we didn't manipulate the hide during the drying process, those fibers would initially be soft, but as that hide dries, they would become glued and stuck together. So it's important that we manipulate the hide during the drying process. And there's a technique to it, and knowing when to manipulate the hide and when to just leave it rest. So we'll get into that once we apply the liquid. There's no secret to applying the tanning liquid or the egg solution. Just brush it on. You can use your hands if you want. You can use a foam brush. Today I'm going to use a paintbrush for the first time. Typically I use like a foam brush, but they're very hard to clean out at the end and they tend to get kind of moldy and stinky and rotten. So we're going to try something different today. So we want to be really liberal with the application, because essentially we want to soak this hide. We want the hide to absorb throughout its entirety and absorb this water mixture into those individual fibers. So don't be afraid to go really liberal on this hide. You cannot put too much on, but you certainly cannot put enough on. So the difference between egg tanning and brain tanning, the biggest issue is, if you're going to brain tan like a deer hide, it's going to turn out snow white and beautiful. If you're using an egg mixture, your hide is going to turn out more of a kind of a buckskin color, because the yellow color in the egg yolk will kind of turn that hide a little bit of a buckskin yellow, not yellow, but more of a buckskin color. So we're going to just do one coat of mixture all over this hide, and we're just going to let it sit and rest and absorb, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do multiple coats on it, and then just let it rest for a while to absorb all of the liquid deep into the cellular tissues. If for some reason your hide doesn't turn out as soft as you would like, you can just apply more and start over and redo the process. I used to really prefer brain tanning, but after working with eggs, they are so much easier. We want to pay extra attention up in the face area. That tends to be an area that is going to be very tough. It's going to be one of your hardest areas to get successfully softened through the process. Let this rest for a little bit, and then we're going to come through and put another coat on. So after we've put the second coat of eggs on here, you can just take like a wet towel, you can put like a plastic bag, you can just roll the hide in half and just let it set for a while so that all of that egg mixture penetrates into the deepest portions of the fibers of the hide. And once you'll know that your hide has absorbed enough liquid when it becomes completely soft and easily bendable. You'll hear less crinkling and crackling when you bend it, and you'll be able to tell. It's kind of like the difference between a piece of wet paper and a piece of dry paper. If you feel like you need more liquid during the process, you can just use more water on the hide as well, because typically the problem will be that the egg mixture is not penetrating into the fibers, and so you need that binder, that carrier of the water, to pull that emulsified oils into the fibers. You can see I've got enough liquid on the hide where it's actually even pooling in some areas, which is perfectly fine. More is better when it comes to this. Ignore the otter, I'm working on that as well today, and I'm just trying to keep my work surface a little bit cleaner here. So we're going to leave this rest, and right now it's just soaking in the hide, and there's not much more we can do until the hide is nice and absorbed with liquid. And the water is just going to end up evaporating out of the hide as it dries, and as you work it, you'll generate heat, and that will help to dry that water out of the fibers as well. So I'm going to put a little bit of extra on here just to make sure we're getting good penetration. And we'll come back in about a half hour and take another look at it. If you want, you can fold the hide together, but just remember the liquid's going to pool on the bottom, so if you fold it over, you might not have as good of absorption on top. So if you do fold it over, make sure you're coming back and flipping it back and forth. So my hide's been sitting here for about a half hour, give or take, and you can see that it's starting to get a little bit tacky and sticky. That's fine. If you find that your solution is just kind of sitting on top and not absorbing in, go ahead and throw a little bit of water on it. I'm getting low on my egg mixture because I've been doing the otter and the beaver, so I'm going to go ahead and put straight water in here, in with this egg solution. So I didn't add a ton of water, but I maybe quartered the volume, quartered to doubled the volume that I had in there. And that water is just going to help drive that emulsified egg mixture down into the fibers. Okay, so a couple of questions I was thinking about is, how do you know when your hide is wet enough that you can stop adding mixture? Well, when your hide starts to get pretty pliable and flexible, that's when you know you're on the right track. The more water you put in, the more water is going to have to dry and come out, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you don't want to put so much, you don't want to soak the hide so much that that the moisture is coming out the fur side of the hide, if that makes any sense. Like if I flip this hide over right now, the fur side is going to be, other than maybe any cracks or tears, but like, you know, the fur side is dry. But see how this hide is starting to be able to roll nice and smooth? That's because the hide is starting to get flexible because that moisture is softening the hide up. So that's what we kind of are looking for. For the most part, we're getting there. This is maybe my third time I've added a coating. And I can tell the real thick areas of the hide, like right around here in the hind area. And those are going to be, it's going to take more for that to soften. The other thing you can do too is as you're working this hide, areas will dry faster than the others, like the thin sides will dry faster. And there's nothing that says that you can't go through and put some more, like once this becomes half dry, there's nothing that says I can't come back and hit these heavy areas with another coating of solution. Like this head and neck area, which is always notoriously hard to work. And the reality is, are you going to keep most of this hide on? Are you going to keep the face on the finished hide? Probably not. So if you're going to make a garment or anything out of it. So the reality is this area is my least concern. I really want the back and the sides and the center of the hide to come out perfect. If you're going to turn this into a beaver hoop or put it on the wall or just throw it on the back of a couch, then yeah, you might want the face in there. Then, you know, just make sure you put enough solution in there. Let's check this otter and see how this otter is doing. See this otter, and maybe this is a better example. Do you see how soft this otter has gotten now? Where before, as a tubed skin, it was, you know, it held its shape pretty hard. And I'll give you an example of a before and after. Like this otter, see how I can just wrinkle it and crinkle it like this? This one has soaked up enough where I'm going to start to let it to dry. And when it starts to dry a little bit, then I will start working it. So the other question that came up was, how do I know when I should start working the hide? Well, this otter has enough moisture in it right now, so I don't need to put any more egg mixtures on it. And I probably only put 2 coatings on this one. And as you can see, this is basically like a wet t-shirt or a wet towel. So, but right now, if I sat and worked this hide, it wouldn't do any good. And if I let this hide sit overnight, it would just dry into this shape right here, and it would be like rawhide in the morning. So the key is to let the hide start drying out, and when it starts to become kind of like half dry, that is when I'm going to come back and start to work it. If I worked it right now, yes, I'm moving the fibers, but they're not drying. So if I come back a half hour later and don't do anything with it, they're just going to be hard. So the key is don't work it too early or you're just wasting your effort, because what you want to do is as those fibers dry, you want to move them as they are drying. If they're just soaking wet, moving them doesn't do anything because they're going to be soaking wet when you're done and you didn't gain anything. So you want to move them as they are drying so that when they dry, they're still flexible. So it's kind of an art to figuring that out. But anyway, this otter's looking really good. for where we want it to be as far as starting to work it. So I'm going to leave this otter for about another half hour or so, and then I'm going to come back and look at this. And we might actually start working this otter. I know this is a beaver video, but sometimes the process might be easier to see on this otter. Now for comparison, on this particular otter, you can see how stiff it is, right? It's stiff like I mean, it's not stiff like a board, but it's stiff like cardboard. Like you can bend it, but it's definitely hard, right? Compared to the otter here, which is like a wet t-shirt. So this is what you want compared to this. So it's been probably about a half hour, 40 minutes, and I wanted to give you an update on where these hides were to give you an idea of when you should start working them. So if you look at this otter, and you remember this was started off stiff as a board, right? Now you can see that it's really soft and supple now because it's all absorbed, because it's absorbed all the tanning solution. And it's not tanned, it's just wet is what it is right now. So if you look, I don't know if you can tell closely or not, but there's no, try to get this to focus. There's no standing water on this. It's all soaked in, and this is like a damp chamois at this point. Like I can't wring any water out of it, and you can see how soft and supple it is. Now this is a pretty thin hide, so I think this one is going to tan much easier than the beaver hides I'm used to working on, but this is what I wanted to show you. So right now, even though the outside is starting to dry, the inside layer of the inside layer of the hide is still wet, and that's when we want to start working it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to manipulate the hide, and we're going to stretch it back and forth, because as it starts to dry, it's going to start to shrink. So we want to like separate those fibers back, stretch it back open, and you can kind of see it when it starts to turn white. Now on the head here, the head is very tough still because I don't think it got as much penetration, especially in the nose, whatever. So if you see these dark spots here, you can almost see like a reticulation pattern. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to manipulate this hide, and it's going to start to turn white. And when it turns white, you know you're stretching those fibers. And those fibers, if they're dry enough, they're not going to seize back up on you. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to manipulate the hide, work it over the edge of a bench, work it over a rope, something like that. But what I'm doing is I'm just bending those fibers. I'm just stretching those fibers. So I'm just going to work it over like the edge of the bench right here. And again, the key is just to soften anything that's stiff. I want to make sure that it's still pliable as it dries. And as you do this, you will get a little bit of like the tanning mixture and some flesh particles that will come off. So if you're doing this in a sensitive area, make sure you have a rug down or something where if you're doing it inside, you're not going to get in trouble. So I'm just going to go all over this tube, and I'm just going to, and as I'm pulling down and stretching those fibers so that they are manipulated in every direction. And be careful around openings like leg holes and eye holes, because you can tear the hide, especially if it's a thinner hide like a fox or otter or rabbit or something like that. The reason I'm doing it on kind of an edged thing is I'm also breaking up any membrane that is still left on the outside of that, on the skin side of this hide. Now I'm just going to do it once over, and then I'm going to let this rest and dry some more. And then I'm going to come back in about 20 minutes, and I'm going to do another round of it. You can see it's a little bit tough here, so I'm just going to make sure I work that area really well. And even if you manipulate it with your fingers, kind of roll it in your fingers just to get those fibers moving. You just don't want the fibers to be stationary and dry, or they will dry hard. Now in this beaver hide, you can see how much it's softened up just from being wet. And it's not quite ready to work yet, and I'll show you why. So there's still really some wet areas on this hide. So it wouldn't really do me any good to work this right now, just because it's not starting to dry. Now if you look at the center right here, it's starting to get kind of tacky and sticky. This is getting really close to being ready to work. But because we've got more water in some of these areas, we're going to give this a little bit of time. So the key right now is to get that kind of the outside of the hide dry and still keep the inner layers of the meat of the hide still wet and damp. But we'll give that a few more minutes, and then we're going to come back and we're going to start working the beaver. So as I'm pulling this over this vise, I'm not only manipulating the fibers, but I'm also stretching them apart. And you can see how it's kind of starting to turn white in here. When those fibers stretch and turn white, that's what you kind of want. Now, this hide isn't going to be all white because we used egg instead of brains. So it's going to always have this buckskin yellowish color. And if you don't like that, well, don't use eggs. But so if this was a deer hide and we were brain tanning, every time we stretched it and it turned white, eventually the entire hide would be snow white when we were done. So buckskin only gets its color because you smoke the hide when you're done, because the aldehydes will cement that lubrication into the tissue fibers. And that, like right now, if you didn't smoke a hide and it got wet, it would dry hard again. But if you smoke it, the aldehydes will prevent those fibers from locking back up. So if it gets wet, you just need to give it a few stretches and it'll soften right back up. I'm kind of wondering how this tail is going to turn out. It's my first time doing an otter, so it's an experiment for both of us here. I'm a little bit worried about singeing the hide, but so far I think we're all right. All right, so about every 15 minutes, I come and I give it about 5-10 minutes of stretching and manipulating, and then I let it dry some more, and then I come back and I do the same thing over and over. So it's just a process. So it will take hours to finish the hide, but the time actually working, you know, you're only working 10-15 minutes at a crack. So the other hide that I've done that's really easy is muskrat hides. Are pretty easy because they're so light. And I find the thinner the hide, the less you have to work it. All right, so here we are on the beaver. As you can see, it's pretty supple, but there are some stiff spots. There is a little bit of water on the surface, but that's okay. We're gonna probably start working it anyway. But we're gonna start real easy with this beaver. We're just gonna start kind of folding it over and rolling it a little bit and twisting it. And we're just kind of breaking up that membrane, and it's still pretty stiff in some spots. Like even though it's bendable, it's pretty crunchy still. But that's okay because we're gonna break the hide. And part of the breaking is making sure all that membrane that we talked about earlier is all broken up. But as you can see where I folded the hide, it kind of turned white. Actually, this is pretty close to getting ready. Actually, I think this one's about ready to start working. I'm gonna throw this on the vise for a couple seconds and see if I can show you how it starts to turn white. I like to have kind of a sharper edge, not like a knife sharp, but like something that can kind of break those fibers up. And the more you work it, the softer it's going to get. So the further along the process, the little bit easier it is to kind of roll the hide around. And can you see how the hide is starting to kind of get lighter color? That's what we want. That's basically it's stretching the hide out, and you can see the kind of the texture of the hide right now. It's a little bit stiffer in the middle. It's still pretty crunchy, but the edges here's a good example of how it starts to turn kind of white. And so all the extra kind of fat and extra gristle and stuff is all gonna kind of get wore off during this process too. So don't worry too much about that right now. sometimes you'll get these like hard seams in the hide. So another method that I have for softening overall is to kind of roll the hide. So I'll basically just turn a corner in. You can see like the edges are kind of tough and hard. And so sometimes what I like to do is I'll roll the hide in on itself. Then I'll just put downward pressure. I'll put downward pressure and I'll roll the hide. And anytime I hit like a hard seam, seam and like a bend, like if you bent it and it was kind of like a hard ridge, by rolling it, I can kind of eliminate those ridges, and then it's still really manipulating those fibers. And I can put a little force on them to really get in there and break up those hard ridges. And right now there's a scar area in the back that's a little bit tough, but and I don't think there's really a right or a wrong way to do this. As long as you're keeping the hide moving at the right time and stretching it and manipulating it, it's probably gonna be all right. And the other thing too is, you know, when you're moving it, you're creating heat, and that's drying out the inner portion, the inner layers of the hide as well. When you first start doing this, it seems like you're not making any progress at all. And then all of a sudden you'll get to this stage where it's like, oh wow, this is really starting to come together. So you just have to keep working it. And right now is kind of a crucial time. Like at the beginning, you can walk away from it for 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes as it's drying. But right now is kind of a crucial time, and you really want to make sure that you're paying good attention to it, because right now it feels damp, but it's not. It feels like it's half dry, if that makes sense. And it's hard to articulate feelings, of course, how things feel, but it comes with experience too. And so then the other question I thought people would ask is, well, how do you know when it's done? If you touch the hide and it feels cool to the touch, it's not done. That means there's probably some moisture in it. And if you stop this process at any point before it's finished, once you start, it's gonna dry hard. Except for the places that maybe were dry. Once you start, you don't want to leave this overnight. And, it's not something you can pick up later. You have to finish it to completion. Otherwise, you have to start all over. And then we'll pull it over the edge of the workbench again. See, right in here, I've got some like hard ridges. You can kind of see in here where it's been. And in between the bends, it's kind of tough. So what we're going to do is we're going to roll that, and we're going to get rid of all those ridges. And there's probably a tool or a weight or something that I could use on this to make this even easier, but for right now I'm not really thinking of that. Yeah, something like this would kind of break those fibers down and open them up. And after I've gone through the whole hide rolling it, like from head to tail, I'll flip it over and I'll do from side to side, same type of thing. So I was working this beaver for about 15 minutes. I'm going to take a break now and let it kind of dry a little bit more. As you can see, it's starting to get, it's a little bit stiff right now. We still have some work to do, especially in the middle. It's still pretty wet. All of this dark stuff right here, this is that membrane that we were talking about. And that will eventually kind of wear off during this stretching process. And here's the otter. Still working on that one. It's much softer than it was when we started. And this will continue to get more and more soft as we continue to work it and it continues to dry. But right now we're at the stage where we've kind of stretched it as much as we can for the moisture content that it has. And it's not going to do us a lot of good to continue to stretch it until it starts to dry a little bit more and we can break those fibers loose again. All right, so we've got the beaver and the otter both finished up. I haven't turned the otter inside out yet just because I want this has a little bit of moisture in it still, and so I want it to dry completely before I turn it inside out. But the otter turned out nicely, at least from what I can see. And the beaver turned out nicely as well. As you can see, it is nice and supple and soft. Here's what the skin side looks like. I probably will hit it one more time over the vise just to kind of get rid of some of the membrane kind of fuzzies, so to speak. But this is pretty typical of what the hide looks like on the inside. So this too has just a little bit of moisture in it left too, but I think what I'm going to do is let it sit for probably about an hour, and then I'll come back and I'll run it back over the vise and over the edge of the workbench. But as you can see, I mean, it's about as soft as you can get. Beavers are very, very, if it looks like it's a little bit stiff, it's not. It's just that this hide is such a thick hide. But it's really a nice finished beaver hide, and I was checking the clock to see how long it took me, and it probably took me about an hour of actual work and probably about 3 to 4 hours of total from start to finish with the downtime of letting it rest and dry. So anyway, if you're ever interested in tanning your own fur, I think this is a great, simple, easy, no chemical method that you can use, and instead of having like a 3-day process, you can do it in about 3 hours. So it is a lot of elbow grease, a lot of work, but definitely worth it in the end. And I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something, and if you made it this far, please hit the like button. I appreciate it. It does help the channel, and it is a reward for sharing my work with you. So thanks again, and as always, we will see you soon.